Excuse me. Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves so that people on the phone know who is here. And then we will go to the phone. So Sue Miller.
Nikisha May Coyle with the Early Learning Division.
Jalen Seppa with the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. Remy Watts with the Early Learning Division.
Dawn Baker with the Early Learning Division.
Matt Morton with My Memorial Trust.
Coyle with the Immigrant Refugee Community Organization.
Katie Field, Early Learning Division.
Ruby Ramirez, Oregon Community Foundation.
Perfect.
Just under the wire.
Really great, truly.
And Amy is here also from the Children's Institute. So on the phone,
Ana Olivia
we
Palazzo.
can see you.
Yes,
Thank
Ana
you
Olivia
for-
Palazzo Angulo from the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality.
All right, thanks for being on the phone. And yes, Sadie, sounds like you're on the phone. Is anyone else calling in?
Hi, this is Valeria Atanasio. I work for the Early Learning Hub, but I also represent, I'm a tribal member with the Grand Ronde Tribe and sit on the education committee out there, so I'm calling in.
Awesome. Thank you, Valeria, for calling in. Great to have you on the phone. Anybody else on the phone? If not, we have public testimony at the beginning of our agenda, and there's nobody in the room who would be testifying, and I don't know if anyone on the phone wants to speak, other than committee members who will speak during the meeting. Hearing no one, we will then move ahead with our agenda. And I think we all want to start out by thanking staff for once again doing an amazing job of pulling together information in a very quick turnaround and presenting it so that we can move through these rules. What we thought we would do today, and it's indicated on our agenda, is that we'll go through the rules and talk about the changes that are in here, which staff has yellow highlighted, changes and questions. And then we will get to the parts that at the end of the rules that we haven't discussed yet.
Sure.
So Katie.
So maybe I'll just take a quick walk through where we ended on Tuesday, and then just, so as you recall, the rules were getting quite messy with the track changes. So we did make edits following our meeting on Tuesday and filed the draft rules with the Secretary of State's office yesterday. So what I started with was the cleaned up administrative rules that we filed. Then I went through and made the highlights, just noting the major, any changes that we made that you hadn't seen on Tuesday. And then I might just ask those on the phone to maybe mute your phones unless you're speaking. We're hearing some background noise. And as we kind of go through, this first change on page 1 came from Sarah Michelson, our Chief of Staff. I was hesitant to make this change without your input, because this change also impacts or would be considered under the program and planning grants, that the language was also included in the characteristics that came from the CSO document that sounded like it had a lot of stakeholder input. So just put it out there for consideration when we're looking at the first language of the community served. In some additional conversations with Sarah, she also suggested maybe it would be in the preferred in addition to the first language of the community served. But again, that's just for your consideration, not a must do.
Sure, why don't we go ahead and discuss it, since we're just going to march through this. And as you can see, it shows up again on page 6 and page 7, as Katie suggested, in the document, the language that we just pulled directly from the culturally specific preschool report that OCF and state to.
And Sadie's on the phone, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I think she had some.
So Sadie, do you have a comment about changing that language from first to either preferred or home language?
Yeah, I actually think that's a great suggestion. Either preferred or home language, I think gives more flexibility in the spirit of I think what we mean by when we say first language, and first could be very technical.
Okay. Sadie, what would you think about preferred in addition to the first language?
First and preferred?
Either whatever you're comfortable with, I think is fine. Preferred?
For me,
Preferred.
Coy, what do you think? And Ana Olivia?
yeah, this is Koi. We actually had a conversation about this
Okay.
At our agency, and we prefer.
Preferred, okay, let's go with that in all three places then.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
It was the same reasons as what Sadie was talking about. Also with our identities, we may identify as a specific ethnicity, but maybe our language is not necessarily, our first language is not necessarily our primary language at home. And so having a preferred language opens up more inclusivity. Right?
That's fine with me.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you.
Okay, we'll go with preferred.
All right, on page 2, we modified the definition of planning grant to match the changes that we discussed around the planning grants on Tuesday.
So comments on this, we were trying, part of our conversation on Tuesday was, does a planning grant go to a community org, culturally specific community org, or this culturally specific program according to our definitions? And this language is trying to make it really open so that we can be responsive to whomever in a community may apply and be in a position to expand capacity. So any concerns with this or alternative language you'd like to propose?
And if it's helpful, we can always go discuss the planning grant section and hop back to the definition if that's.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I'm not quite sure it offers the clarity that maybe it needs to, but.
Should we just hold that until we get to
Okay.
planning grant?
Good idea.
Okay.
Katie.
Where I'm confused is expanding communities capacity.
Okay, let's hold on to that for just a second and hop back when we get to the planning grants. So positive family indicators was just to sort of align it with the definition we agreed to under positive child indicators to just tie it back to the early learning guidelines. So just consistency. Number 1, also that change was really just to make the language consistent with other language around tribes. Number 3, that was really just a fix. We still had it, number 3, tied to the program outcomes, the overall program outcomes identified in the evaluation at the end of the rules instead of the specific grant outcomes. So that was just a correction. Number 5 was just to clarify that the technical assistance was really related to the technical aspects of the application and not to the, helping the grant applicant come up with the content, really not writing the application for them, but the technical aspects.
Any comments on that? That would be the focus of TA.
Makes sense.
Sounds okay?
Okay, and then into eligibility criteria. 1, I think that was just a good clarity by Sarah also. She added the words operate a culturally specific program, and I think there were just a couple words, but the more I think about it, the more it brought clarity, because it used to read be a culturally specific organization or a culturally specific early learning program, and it's like, well, you can't really be a program, you operate a program. It made more sense to me.
sound okay to people?
What was it before?
There was just nothing there. It
Oh.
just said there were, I think
Or
it just,
culturally
Culturally
specific.
specific.
yes,
Yep, yep.
yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
there was not a verb.
So that sounds okay?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hi. So this is the part where we have to go with DOJ. We wanted it just to say culturally specific organization, but it says or operate a program, and I think the language is good. We can't really have what we wish, which was that it would only be culturally specific organizations, you know, so. But I think operate a culturally specific program would be, it's a good thing if we have a, how do we audit or make sure that somebody doesn't call something that when it's really not?
I think that we then get back to the definition of what a culturally specific program is. I was looking at that, reading that definition again. I've read the rules quite a bit the last few days. And it gave me a lot of comfort again. So that means a program that is designed to serve a particular cultural community and is primarily staffed and led by members of that community. The culturally specific early learning program is designed by or adapted by members of the cultural community that it serves. This program may or may not exist within a culturally specific organization. So that's the part that I know is not comforting, but I think the first part of the definition helps to get you there.
I think that thought a lot about this, over the last week, and reminded me of, a lot of contentious conversation here within Multnomah County about culturally specific programs run out of majority culture organizations, and there hasn't been. I don't think there's been a clear like all sides agree, but from my experience, organizations that are in fact culturally specific and fit that definition, pretty unanimously, if not totally unanimously, agree that there's some skepticism of whether or not a culturally specific program actually can exist within a majority cultural organization because of the parameters and the definitions of cultural specificity. If you have a program that is led by, you still have leadership within an organization that is majority culture and doesn't fit the qualifications of a culturally specific organization. So I think that's why there's a lot of contention around this. And similar to, I think our last meeting we talked about MWESB, you have sort of abusive behavior of, we have, a person in charge or leadership of a particular organization, but who might be a person of color, but who doesn't, and then the full organization benefits from a program like MWESB. Similar to this is, well, we have a program that's intended to serve, but our leadership, our organization, our culture is not reflective of the community we're intending to serve. So I wanted to offer that as some history around the contention of this, and that it's been going on for 15 years, if not more, in the in I think this area, and not at all resolved. In fact, the definition of cultural specificity has really fluctuated depending on your public agency. Early years that we talked about, I think in our first meeting, the children's levy, early years of the children's levy, when cultural specificity was really sort of coming out and being presented by communities, their first response is, how do we water it down so more organizations can identify as such? Not, let's look at the definition and sort of hold the truth in that definition, and then also figure out how majority cultural organizations become culturally responsive as organizations. That's a very different type of organization. I think, Sue, I sent you an email about there's been a lot of research around this actually, about the characteristics of culturally specific organizations and staff and the characteristics of culturally responsive organizations and staff. There's a lot of overlap, but there's also very different characteristics of each. So I think that if we are being directed by DOJ or whomever that we can't be restrictive, I think we still need to understand what I believe to be the intention of this, and that we're looking for culturally specific organizations and programming that are embedded within the communities they serve. Those are the organizations that are going to get the results that we're looking for out of this investment, in my opinion. So
is there anything we can do to tighten up this culturally specific early learning program definition a little bit to get us a little closer?
I might suggest something. One of the issues that I think of when Matt is talking was actually in supervision. For example, we know a lot of Latina or Latino teachers at the schools. And what we hear is every time they have a principal of color, the school feels relaxed, and the teachers of color and the CSOCs and classified staff of color feel like they're included, and they feel like they can suggest ideas and have some autonomy or control over, decision making, right? And one school I know, for example, changed, the principal moved, and then they had a white principal that we all know very well. She's really nice. The white teachers, some of them liked the principal of color and some didn't, and didn't follow what she was trying to do with the school. When this white principal came, very nice, been here a long time. The white teachers were very happy. Some of the teachers of color and almost all the classified staff of color said, well, we're just looking ahead now. The whole thing feels different, and we just keep our nose straight forward, don't do anything outside of our jobs, just do our jobs. And so it really depends on the leadership of an organization. That's why I said, how do we audit that? I happen to know one lady that I think she could probably develop a really good culturally specific program completely, like, aside from the other programs, right? That she has 17 different sites. She has Head Start in one, and you know what I mean? I think she could do it. She would probably even ask me for technical assistance just because we have a good relationship. But the point is how do we audit a program that decides to be a larger traditional organization that wants to add a culturally specific arm?
Okay, good question and good conversation. And let me go back to the question that Katie posed. Do we have language that we want to insert in this definition of culturally specific early learning program that would tighten it up? And Matt, going back to your comment, and that document you sent me was very informative based on the research phase. But are there verbs that we want to use, like culturally specific in that definition? I'm at the top of page 4, number 4. So the culturally specific early learning program is designed by or adapted by. Do you want to, you're talking about embedded, I think was your word, Matt.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, I think my point is this last sentence of the program may or may not exist within a culturally specific organization.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think the contention is that I don't think it exists within an organization that is not culturally specific.
Right.
So
we could try.
that's really the thing, is that and I think, I don't know if that, I don't want to speak for everyone. I believe that to be true from my experience. You can't have a structure that is majority culture and existing outside of the cultural community be the decision-making structure, and then have a program that is still culturally specific. You can be culturally responsive and very culturally responsive, but you can't be culturally specific, in my opinion, my definition. I don't know, Jalen, I want to think of, these are, organizations, community organizations, not sovereign nations, but I think the same might be true for tribal communities where you have the leadership, if there was some other leadership other than council, that isn't a tribal organization, right? I mean, you're a tribal organization because you have tribal leadership at council.
Well, and this happens all the time. Like, I could imagine our early learning hub potentially applying, and that would be the makeup. Their leadership would be deciding, and that's what happens right now. They decide how much of the chunk we get when we're written into their grants. And then it's just, hey, we have 10,000 for you. We have 15,000. What do you need to do with this? And there's no intention behind it. It's just money that they got, and we get a little slice of the pie. And, and sometimes that's great, but a lot of the times, like, us then having to work within our parameters of being a tribal government and the languages are different, it's really hard for us to figure out how to use that funding because it's not in our language. It's not our person didn't get to review and have a say-so in how that language comes out. And so then it really makes it difficult for us on how we can spend it. Because they're thinking, oh, we'll give you money and you can spend it however you want. But we're a government within ourselves. And so we have rules as well. And so and this happens all the time. So I really appreciate the conversation again, because I don't know how, I'm like trying to think, how do I start looking at this and maybe rewording it, but
Can I offer? I guess I would say that a program that you're describing, Jalen, would not be a program that is designed to serve a particular cultural community. If a hub was developing that without your knowledge, and it would also not be staffed and led by members of that community. So it would not meet the definition that we have currently in our rules today. So in thinking about the definition, I guess I want to offer two thoughts. One, if we do, in thinking it through, I think we probably could change that last piece of the definition to narrow it. I had never thought of that before. We might be able to get away with just saying it does not, like limiting it, but does that do anything? You might be limiting yourselves in a way that you don't want to for like the east side of the state where you were looking at like a larger entity helping one of the smaller entities. So just, we have to, I think, walk that careful line. So that's one school of thought. The other thing I was thinking about is just know that we likely won't get it perfect the first time. So we are going to learn from this first year, and we may very well have to refine the rules after the first year. Or if there are statutory changes we need, God forsake that we have to go through this process again, that's not out of the question. So, I think we have options. Just this doesn't have to, we want to get it pretty close the first time, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And we do hope to learn from the first year of the grant cycle.
So the recommendation I would make to, the recommendation I would make to the committee is that we remove that after the semicolon, we remove that last bit, leave it at that.
Sure.
And yeah, that's my recommendation to the committee. And we'll see if it passes muster. If it doesn't, then we can revisit it. I think the way it reads now, that last sentence reads to me as a coded message to majority cultural organizations saying, don't worry, we won't leave you out of this.
I agree with that very much. And in fact, I didn't think it actually added to the definition. It was another type of add-in that doesn't actually part of a definition. And then the other word I would go to really change here is designed by, not designed to serve, not designed to serve culturally specific people, but designed by the culturally specific, people that are being served, the same people served as our, whatever, you know what I mean, right? So I would say designed by, and so like I said, as long as we have to leave something open with DOJ, any organization that decided to go for this would have to really develop an autonomous program within their organization that was not told how to do things. And, it would be a really autonomous program. And then I also agree with Matt that it's really hard to even use the word specific if it's almost like saying a culturally specific organization or a culturally responsive organization, and a culturally specific program or a culturally responsive program. And we really need to decide. They didn't tell us we had to use the word responsive. And if we use specific, it pretty much does leave out mostly everybody else. So they said specific. So that probably gives us a lot of leeway to super limit. I'm just saying that there's not 100% chance that somebody couldn't run a really good one, but just it's almost, very low chance. So.
Well, and I think by eliminating that last sentence, I mean, it's not that we're closing the door and saying a majority culture organization can't apply. We haven't said that.
Right. It's not an invitation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm just gonna, because we have the composition of this group here, I think it's important to think about a culturally specific program. So we have the criteria for organization. What additional elements should we be considering in this process for program that will help sort of get us closer to being on point with who we're really trying to serve? You know what I'm saying? I feel like there's an opportunity here we can either use the same criteria for organization as we use for program, but if there's anything anecdotally, and I'm really curious, Matt, about the information that you provided to Sue to look that over as well. What are your thoughts in this room on how, as we're looking at a culturally specific program, what specific things should we be looking at? And maybe the materials that you provided sort of elucidate some of that stuff for us as well. But I just think I would be remiss if I didn't ask this group for that piece of it, because I think we are going to be entertaining applications like that. And I just think it would be really helpful.
So, and can I ask for us to also reframe our language, similar to what Matt was talking about in regards to a program that's under a mainstream dominant culture organization is culturally responsive. They're not culturally specific. And so with that said, definitely there are recommendations that we can make. I think this committee is still, for me at least, I won't speak for the whole committee. For me, it's still the intention of the grant was for culturally specific organizations and tribes to have access to this grant, and by opening this up to mainstream dominant culture organizations that are responsive to our communities, which is wonderful. All programs and organizations should be responsive to our communities. It is taking away the funding and the pie and the resources that this grant was actually, or this funding, this bill was intentionally being pushed for. So my pushback again is still, could we go against DOJ's recommendation and make it a culturally specific grant for culturally specific organizations only? And Matt, I know that you were going to answer Nikisha's question there, but I still want for us to have that conversation before the end of today.
I think let's keep going through the rules and see if when we're done at the end of the day, if you feel like we've narrowed. So I think when we're talking about DOJ's recommendations, I think what I want to make clear is when I read the statute and I get DOJ's advice, it's really what did the legislature give us
what are the boundaries that we're working within? So when I read the statute, I'm not sure we can limit it to just culturally specific organizations. I think we've done a lot to narrow it so that the definitions that you're working from have narrowed the playing field a lot to get to those organizations you're trying to get to. So, but can we full on exclude others? I don't know that we can do that, but I think we can do a lot to tailor the applications and the scoring criteria to get to those organizations. So let's try. Let's see how close we can get. So I think you're getting really close.
Can I just, sure. I know that there is, the recommendations from GOJ and there's criteria and parameters that we have to stay in, but I think if the intention is that we're trying to fund a certain set group or population, I think pushback needs to be done. I'm fortunate enough to work for someone who constantly pushes the state to change. And I've seen a lot of changes to where the tribes get carve-out dollars because my boss is advocating and pushing those limits and saying, just because your language says that, that doesn't mean that it has to be that way.
Right.
So I think as we think about who we're trying to serve, I think, in the times that we are living in, we need to push back and we need to push the limit and push that envelope because changes aren't going to happen if we don't do that. Even if we have a parameter, those can always change. So I just, from a tribe's perspective, and I know my boss would probably say the same thing if she was sitting here, is she's constantly pushing and she's had language get changed at that level. So I just, I really appreciate your comment and I completely agree with it from a tribal perspective, and I'm pretty sure I won't speak for all the tribes, but I think they would be in agreement as well.
Sure. No, I appreciate the feedback. I think the
Katie?
challenge. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that the word by, designed by, got stuck in there. I didn't hear anybody.
It is.
Well,
It's in there.
It's actually in the definition later on, Olivia. So it's in the second sentence. It already says designed by.
Yeah.
Or the second part of that sentence.
Oh, I didn't see it.
It does say that
So
in the definition. So I think what Katie's suggesting, if, the scoring criteria that we worked on last time and we, just transposed the specific, culturally specific org language into here, by having that be the scoring criteria, I think what it's trying to do is get at exactly what we're talking about, to say they are going to be scored according to whether it's an organization applying meets all of these criteria.
Right.
Which seems to me, if you look at these, it almost by the definition of this means it's going to be a culturally specific organization.
And the challenge for us as state agency staff, we're not able to operate, although we may also agree with you that it was the legislature's intention to do something, we are bound by operating within the words that they put on paper. But we can offer you flexibility to try to help you define through rule within the boundaries of the statute that came out, which is why we're trying to get to as much, trying to, make the rules get as refined as possible to meet your desire for a program. So that's what I'm trying to do today and this week, to try to get as close as possible to narrow the groups. So we'll continue to do that, and hopefully we'll walk away today feeling like you're getting to what you want out of a program, because ultimately that's why we've engaged you.
So if you look at the scoring criteria on page 6, under B, which were pulled from that report, I'm not sure a majority culture organization will meet these criteria. You think it can?
Right. So first they have to. So first they have to meet 3 or more of the criteria in A. So that's sort of a minimum threshold. Then we will score them based on the 1 through 11 criteria. These are the ones that you helped us. Because it's 80.
Obviously, that criteria, those criteria, we're trying to define what is a culturally specific organization. And so we put that into the rule.
How are you, on number 2, so B, number 2, mission and outcomes align with expressed community needs. How is the expressed community needs, where's that gonna show up?
So I guess I would assume like, maybe we can use an example like your hub situation. So if a hub was to apply for, let's just assume they tried to seek a grant or the equity funds on your behalf. So if they were to, I guess I would assume they would, if they were to try that, they would have to, I don't know that they could qualify because they would be having to do some real solid work. And I don't know how they could do that without the tribe's direct engagement. I mean, you would have to be in working side by side, and I don't know that they couldn't meet all of the criteria because they couldn't hold leadership positions in your organization, could they? So that would rule them out right there, number 8. So that would eliminate them from being eligible to apply.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just,
No,
like I said, this happens to us on a weekly basis.
For me, it helps to walk through a specific example to see how it would work in real life.
Because, I mean, from the phone call on Tuesday, it sounded like there wasn't gonna be, and I don't remember where it was supposed to be, but it wasn't like if they're applying with the tribe listed, that there wasn't gonna be a requirement for a letter of support or things like that. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, I'm in the mindset of, okay, if my tribe, or if anybody's applying on behalf of my tribe, how, you know, because they get away with it all the time. So no matter what is in your language, sometimes they still get away with it. They could, you know, what I'm thinking when I read that sentence is they'll just pull all the data that they have and send that to you guys.
Right.
And so, and you know, people love data. Sure. Dominant society loves data, and so they'll be like, oh yeah, they know what they're talking about. They have the data for Warm Springs, not understanding that Warm Springs doesn't have the capacity to collect their own data at a full extent. And so most of the time it's done for us, you know, to us, not with us, or us doing it ourselves, and then they keep the data. So when I read that statement, that's what comes to my mind is they could just send you a fact sheet of data and you'll be like, oh yeah, they must be working with the tribes because they have all this amazing data, and they're not.
Right.
But I don't think they could demonstrate that that ESD's leadership is the tribe.
No, they
Tribal
can't, but
members.
I'm saying, I think what people aren't understanding is this happens, even when language is tight, it happens.
Right.
That's why I was saying, if we're not gonna push back on trying to say that this is a specific grant for a specific set of people, you're still gonna have folks that are gonna be able to walk through this and get through with, you know, because you're only saying X amount of these need to, so.
Right. So I think the folks in the room, I'm not sure you realize, Jalen, Nikisha and Dawn are on Nikisha's responsible for implementing this program. So her team is scoring, like, she'll be responsible for scoring applications. So you've actually got the folks in the room here.
And that was why I
That we'll be
asked the
doing.
question that I did a few moments ago. Because if we're looking at sort of the road ahead of us, I mean, we can have what our intention is, what we really want, but I think we have to plan for what happens when. So I was listening to this conversation here, and some things that popped out that we can hopefully avoid having an entity apply on behalf of, because that's not the intention. Is the program embedded in the organization? Does the program operate as its own organization? And how does the funding, I mean, there's ways for us to get more granular than just a high level question that tells us that they want to operate a program. So we'll just have to go deeper, and that I really think that that kind of information, as we're having this discussion, will help me and the team really be intentional about, as we're looking at organizations that are delivering culturally responsive programming, that will just help us with the types of questions we ask that particular group of
So-
applicants.
I just sent an email to everyone, and it includes the list of a really long list of characteristics of culturally responsive programs and culturally specific programs and organizations, as well as an article on making a case for culturally specific organizations. So I think from that you'll be able to draw, and the characteristics were drawn from a Delphi study that was done by Dr. Ann Curry Stevens at PSU with organizations locally, and it really pulled out a lot of key characteristics of these organizations, and it's really on the front end of these kinds of definitions and this kind of clarity, and I would say sort of the sort of academic work it's on the front end. Communities have held on to these definitions and experiences for a very long time. So hopefully that could help guide a little bit in this work.
And Keisha, you said something, I don't know if it's in here somewhere, does the program function as its own organization? Is that something that can be inserted somewhere, or is it inserted somewhere?
What I'm doing is taking notes, absolutely. I'm not sure for the rules piece of it, but I'm thinking sort of application piece of it.
Because that speaks to the point that I made about, maybe a group isn't an organization, but they have a fiscal sponsor, right? And so speaking to that, they don't have to be a C3, they don't have to be an organization, but they can function as their own, right? And in that case, they would be able to show that their leadership is, belongs to the community served, and I feel like that's more clear. And I think it gets to the intention a little bit more too. Like, we don't want it to be a mainstream organization, but if they have to work with a mainstream organization, we want to make sure it's, yeah.
Well, then that's where the capacity, right, the technical assistance capacity will come in to support and to hopefully get them to the point where they're at, yeah.
Okay, I've got a suggestion. What if we made that one characteristic and eligibility criteria?
Which one?
That people in leadership positions belong to the community served, pulled it forward into an eligibility criteria. That seems like a biggie for.
That's good. Yeah.
Just ponder that. I don't.
Would that go into 4?
It would go into the previous page, yes. So it would become a number 5 for an eligibility criteria. Keisha, what do you think?
I think so.
I mean, from just the conversation here, that just seems like a biggie, and that might help you also get to the CSOs versus the. It's sort of a roundabout way to get there. So I had none from that.
So we're pulling B8.
Yeah, just move 8 to an eligibility criteria. It becomes 5 on the previous page. Don't worry, I'll make our DOJ attorney next, but that's okay.
So does that address this issue?
I think that makes me more comfortable, like when I'm thinking about side organizations that, there's a lot of them that would not be able to, because they don't represent the community. We all serve, we're the token native in a lot of their boards and committees, but there's only one of us, so if they applied and then you saw only one of us, then you would know that that's not community led and community leadership, so that makes me more comfortable.
These are the artful ways that we can work within the statutory boundaries that. I'm sorry.
I appreciate the creativity that is going into this.
Sure.
Okay,
I
so
forgot where we were
am
at.
I seeing agreement that we want to then move what's number 8 on scoring criteria over to number 5 as eligibility criteria?
And so we would, yes, I think we would delete it out of the scoring it altogether. And we would move it out of the scoring criteria under the planning grants also, because it becomes eligibility for that as well.
Okay. What do you all think about this for a minute?
I have a question on that. This is
Okay.
Maritza. Sorry, I came a little bit late to the conversation, but number 8 on page 6, it says people of leadership positions that could include directors, manager, and board members belong to the community served. And I'm hearing that there could be a culture-specific organization that don't have a status, a 501c3 status that could see this opportunity in serving their community, but would need to partner with a fiscal organization, and that fiscal organization may not represent their community, but they may have a good partnership established that they would be it would be an open relationship that they're able to use those fundings, and there will be the culture specific organization would be the one taking charge of the leadership of that program or capacity building. Would the people in the leadership position, would that be in those situations, would that be looking at the organization or the group of that is running this program or building that capacity, or would it be looking at the fiscal organization?
So this is Matt, but how I look at that in the work that I do is I look at who is the organization that's doing the work. A fiscal sponsor has a very narrow responsibility for the organization. It's a technical responsibility. You don't relinquish your bylaws, your leadership, your programming if you get into a fiscal sponsorship relationship with someone, with another organization. They serve a purpose. So within criteria or evaluating, you would be evaluating the organization that is being sponsored, not the organization that is doing the sponsoring. You'd base it on what that organization, the leadership and the makeup of that organization doing the direct work. So, and that's how we look at it.
And that would be the organization that would be applying for
that. That would be the organization that would be applying. You would be using a fiscal sponsor because of the sort of the technical aspects of where money, the types of the infrastructure where money can go to certain types of organizations. But really, it's those who are doing the work are the ones that you're looking at. You're making sure fit this criteria.
So can you imagine just 1 second, Olivia. Can you imagine a situation where the applicant is not actually an organization? It's not defined that way. It's not a 501c. It's not anything. It's a program that's operating that may want to, with the planning grant, evolve into an organization, but it's a program. And so the fiscal sponsor would need to be the applicant for the program to give it a chance of becoming an organization.
So, but where the rubber meets the road in that case is still with the program, with the work that's being done, right? Not the fiscal sponsor. You have to have there's an agreement between those two organizations that there's a role that's played, and the fiscal sponsor doesn't do the programmatic work, and the programmatic organization or entity doesn't do that fiscal sponsorship work. So,
but we don't even talk about a fiscal sponsor in here. It's silent. It's in other rules, but it's not in here.
Yeah,
so do
and I'm
we
not
want
sure
to put that in?
I don't know.
No,
I wouldn't, because I think I think we may have a tendency to say, well, let's make all the rules around this one situation that might exist, where in fact we need to keep our focus on organizations that are doing the work. And if there's other statute or other things around it, let that hopefully take care of it. But I would say, I mean, you know, the state can only give money to certain types of organizations. And if we have an intention around this, which is stated that there's a capacity building component to it, then we have to be able to take into account the fact that they're going to be organizations that may not have the capacity, and that we want to invest in that capacity, and that requires a fiscal sponsorship or fiscal agent to act as an intermediary or go-between in that scenario. Still, I like in your I would be looking at the organization doing the work,
Yes.
and be looking at them and their agreement with their fiscal agent. That's how.
Yeah.
Because that's
I would
that's
say-
just as they would have someone do their payroll.
Yeah.
Right.
Someone be their fiscal agency.
Right. I was just going to insert that under Oregon law, 3 people are an organization, and you don't need a 501c3 until you've got more than a certain amount of money. Not a 501c3, something else, filing a 990 or something. But anyway, 3 people, and the first capacity building thing would just make sure that they have the articles of incorporation, and then they're an organization by Oregon law. So you don't have to have a 501c3. You are an organization, all volunteer or whatever. So.
Right.
Yeah, we operate. We do this all the time. We don't give grants to individual people, whereas some foundations can re-grant like that. They have to be 501c3 organizations or other entities like that. But we're always, when we're looking at demographic or programmatic impact, it's always the organization that's doing the work. The fiscal agent has a role that they play that's critical to the transaction,
Right.
but it stays there.
And we don't need that piece about a fiscal agent in the rules. I think it's really important in terms of the outreach that's done and sort of the communication out about the application process and that. So I think that's a place for that description.
Okay, I'm seeing agreement on that. We won't try to insert that. Okay, so
I think we've covered, I feel like we're in agreement on program grants. Can we just touch briefly on planning grants? I know we're a little bit behind schedule. So
Yeah.
if you recall, when we left on Tuesday, we had quite a lengthy discussion about planning grants. And I just want to make sure that the language that I landed on in the top of number 3, a description of planning grants, meets your needs. And Matt had some direct input, so hopefully he'll take a peek at that when he gets back too. And then also, I talked to Sue after the fact, and hopefully I haven't taken too many liberties, but notice the highlighted language down in D. If you recall, the language you last saw talked about a planning grant for a year. And the more, I know we sort of ended quickly, and it just felt like a year was going to be way too short for programs to really get up and running. And I didn't feel like there was a lot of love around that 1 year time frame. And if the true intention is really to build these programs up and then transition them into a program, I felt like you might all be comfortable with this language, just to sort of, give them 2 years or up to 2 years to get up and running. And then if they're performing well and they want to keep going, transition them into the program grants. So took some liberties there. Hopefully you're okay with that. Okay.
yeah, I would see that as a major improvement over the 1 year hard stop. Okay.
So maybe we can just touch base with Matt on the language when he gets back.
Okay, the language at the top
At
is
the
what
top,
you're
yeah.
referring to?
Right, because he had some, remember modified his language a little bit there. Should have highlighted number 3 at the top.
Okay. All right, so we'll come back to that. So do we need to go back then to the culturally specific early learning program definition on page 4, the top of
I
page
think we
4?
covered that definition. I think we need to go to the planning grant definition.
Oh, sorry, right, sorry, planning grant. So it seems as if that's consistent with what is in the planning grants section now. Comments on the definition of planning grant on page 4, number 8.
I wanted-
It is like,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, it is now a bit different than the way it's framed, at the top of page 7, which I actually like better. Because at the top of page 7, we talk about, promoting the capacity of culturally specific organizations to deliver the services. Whereas expanding a community's capacity to develop and deliver is a little bit ambiguous. I know what I mean when I read community, but others could take it to mean something else. So I prefer something more in line with the language at the top of page 7.
So would you suggest, Sadie, that we pull that language so it would be planning grant means a grant to promote the capacity of culturally specific orgs?
And then just continue on, just use the same language. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll just pull that over there.
And
that
this is, oh, sorry.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
I have an additional thing, so I just didn't want to interrupt your statement if you're.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, if I'm reading this correctly, I just wanted to get a clarification. It says for page 7, the last bullet D, it's great that it was extended up to 2 years as a planning and can be converted to a program grant for up to 2 additional years. Is that saying that that's the limit, or for an organization that started as capacity and that went to program grant and what it's only able to receive funding or apply for up to 4 years in total and no future opportunities?
I'm gonna second Maritza. That's how I read it as well.
So what it would be, Maritza, this is Katie, it actually is 2 additional biennia, so that would be actually 4 additional years. So it actually is the same as the program grants. So what our intention is after up to a 6-year cycle, we would run a new solicitation.
Right, to give organizations
a new
chance.
RFA.
Is there a way to possibly make that a little clearer in the language somehow? Because the way I read it, I was like, oh, so we're not going to fund organizations after 6 years?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. And also, where does it say for the program grants that statement? I think I'm skipping it.
Did I miss it? Maybe I
think
deleted it.
I think so.
Oh, thank you. Good catch.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure it was equal.
No, thank you, Maritza. Very important.
I've had a little version control problem this week.
It's going to, be the same language. Right, Katie?
Yes, it will be the
Program
same.
grant.
Yes, my apologies.
No problem. But good catch, thank you. So what I hear you suggesting is that, so this is a 5-year, in the startup, 5-year window. And then to be clear that programs and organizations may reapply at that time. Okay. Anything else on program grants or planning grants?
What was the question we needed to ask Matt?
The definition of planning grant.
Just at the top of page 7.
Right. Okay, we'll come back to that when Matt shows up.
Okay.
Oh, Matt showed up.
I'm here.
Matt, Are you comfortable with the language at the top of page 7, how we describe planning grants? That was just modified from our last conversation on Tuesday.
Yeah, because I think it fits what was stated in terms of the purpose for capacity building.
And then we just talked about modifying the definition of planning grants to more closely match this language.
Oh, okay. So
Back on page.
back on the other page.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, instead of communities capacity, I think that is a little, I think you're right, that's a little confusing.
Okay, so are we ready to move over to program selection and grant award?
Yes.
Page 8. So we had this language before, but haven't had a chance to review it.
Right. Just made some tweaks, fine tuning, so.
Okay, comments on the program selection and grant award section of the document.
My first comment or question is, what does director mean? A director of ELD or director of ELC?
Well, the Early Learning Systems Director is Miriam's title.
Oh, okay,
She says Systems Director, she's not a division director.
got it, okay.
Should we capitalize director? I know that's a nitpicky question.
Yeah, whatever you want to do with that.
There's your
Any comments on this process?
Is there any way to ensure that people from these communities are on these review committees? If within the rules, is there any way to specify some of that? I will note that.
Well, I think you can add to the language too, like the review committee, if you want to define the structure of the review committee in a different way, you can certainly do that.
I think the representation matters,
Yeah,
right? So,
let's think about how we want to phrase the grant review committee.
you know, I think about the scoring criteria and the program grants, the application to be scored based on, you know, experiencing systemic disparities. You have some characteristics here, you know, a representative of, you know, representatives of communities who who are experiencing systemic disparities. Something to that effect.
Okay.
And it's interesting because we already have, Oregon we're very concerned about geography as a distinguishing characteristic, and geography is not like the tippity top issue that we have in the state.
Right. Is that even an issue?
Anyway.
You wanna-
Well, it's listed here in
It's-
number 3
yeah.
in terms of funding decisions, actually. Interesting, that was the only
Yeah.
consideration that was called out for the review committee to prioritize representation.
So let me give you a little bit of background on that. So our advice from council is that there are certain classifications of demographics that aren't as like legally unstable, and geography is one of them. So that's why you see geography as kind of a pervasive theme throughout these rules, is because they're less easy, like discriminating on geography is less easily challenged than discriminating on something like race. Yeah, so that's a legal thing.
But we don't have to include it, right?
No. Yeah.
So we could take geography out.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I would recommend, where is it? I mean, I would just recommend that if we could leave it in, we have it as one of our characteristics, but also include the, you know, those who are experiencing systemic disparities, right? So you likely want to have part of your representation on your committee is that you want to have geographic representation, but it also is really critical to have representation of others who experience disparities.
And I think the reason why we have geographic in there is to make sure that the rural communities are also served in this grant.
Oh, for
And
sure, right.
Holly for sure was concerned about neighborhoods that have been traditionally underrepresented.
Absolutely, and just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting that we remove it from the 5 characteristics that are listed multiple times throughout the rules, and I support what Matt is talking about in terms of pulling that over for the composition of the review committee. I was actually struck by number 3 on page 8, which is a separate, like, I support what Matt's saying, and then this is different to me.
Yeah.
Where it says the review
Number
committee
3,
will make funding recommendations to the director that provide for geographic representation where practicable. I don't think that that's a bad idea, but I just found it interesting that that was the one sort of distribution factor that the committee is held to versus the other factors that, you know, raise.
In theory, the designation of this being an equity investment will get you to the proper representation, right? So if you're really being true to your decision-making around who is it that has experiences the greatest disparity, your decision will be based on where those populations exist. And those exist. I mean, I think, again, I think oftentimes in documents in Oregon, we use geography as code for white, or rural as code for white. And I think that sometimes is, we don't have to state that, but instead we stay true to sort of the demographics that we're seeking to impact. And those demographics are the ones that are experience systemic disparities across the
So
system.
if you put a period after director, moving the remainder of that first sentence, and then in the second sentence.
Well, I think they're also wanting to add that representatives of communities that are experiencing systemic disparities.
And I think that's in number 2.
Right.
Yeah.
That's in the, who's on the review committee.
Yeah.
I also heard, is there some importance to having geographic representation on the review committee? Did I hear that as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the characteristics that we identify
Okay.
as.
But it's not important to have funding recommendations that provide geographic representation.
I would say not above any of the other characteristics.
Okay, do you want to list out any characteristics for funding decisions in this area?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to have any, if your funding recommendations are so out of alignment with your eligibility and selection criteria or scoring criteria, we have a bigger problem, probably.
Right.
So,
And you can leave it up to the you've chosen your selection committee, they have the rest of the rules to work from, you can
Yeah.
leave it at that if you choose to. Okay.
Right.
All right, so we'll just take out the geographic. Okay.
And then we're referencing the eligibility criteria
within number 2.
within number 2.
Or
Or 3, excuse me, yeah.
Thank you.
Say that again.
We're just referencing, so taking out geographic representation and referencing the criteria, which also includes geographical representation, but includes the other 4 criteria.
I actually think that for 3, we just say the review committee makes the funding recommendations, the director makes the final decisions. In 2, when we talk about the Early Learning Council recommended representatives to the director, we identify that these representatives are representative of the populations experiencing systemic disparities. So the number 2 is that we get a little bit more clarity on sort of the makeup of those recommendations for the committee. That's how I was looking at it.
But put the geographic
Yeah,
representation.
it's one of the,
in
yes,
that,
it's one of the,
in number 2, yeah. Is that correct?
It's included in that list. I think if we keep the language consistent as we have throughout the rules, so Early Learning Council will recommend representatives to the committee from populations experiencing systemic disparities because of the following factors. And we listed them. Yeah,
Gotcha.
same way.
I'm feeling the same, where you just reference back.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying, okay.
and it will encompass all populations that we would intend to serve.
Got it.
In the committee and the grant.
I think otherwise there's this sort of message that somehow geographic representation is more important
Then
than the totality of the disparities that we're addressing through this fund. And I don't think that's
Got it.
true.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, good input, really good input. Any other comments on this program selection and grant award?
Just if you had looked at an earlier version, we added 8 because we did not have an appeals process in the rules previously.
And just as far as defining funding recommendation just right now, what do we mean by that?
When you say the
Well,
funding,
for number 3, so review committee will make funding recommendations. What are they making funding recommendations for? Like who's going to receive the grant or the amount that's going to be?
both.
Both. Okay. Okay. And there's a process for that.
Yeah, so what you'll see, sorry, so Nikisha can speak to this more. So we'll have, she's been working on her RFA process, which includes like a scoring mechanism. So using the criteria that you've established by rule, and then there'll be like this rubric that says, you know, for each of the criteria, you know, the applicant, you know, met number 1, you know, by this person, you know, you get, you know, a check in one of these boxes if you met it by, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever percentage you met it. So, you know, by the time you evaluate the entire application, you know, you might get X score, you know, so really trying to figure out how well they met the application. So
The score and then the funding recommendations come from the budgets that get submitted and evaluated. Sort of in totality of all of the applications that come in as well.
So I'm sure that there will be a, you know, like, here's where that application falls in the ranking of and I don't know how the need falls into that ranking, but I'm sure that you'll.
It's all evaluated and it's built into the whole criteria and the scoring.
Okay.
Are we asking organizations to propose their own budgets or is there a kind of framework or maximum for each of them?
We're using a loose framework for organizations that maybe aren't as used to like. So we'll have some sort of a framework, some definitions on different sort of line items, and then a lot of flexibility. We've never done this. But this can be
Okay, any other questions on selection and grant award?
I don't have a question, but more of a comment on number 6. I really appreciate the last sentence there, the provision does not apply to Federal Oregon tribes, because, yeah, again, we're our own government and sometimes things take longer, so I appreciate it.
I think that's exactly why that statement is in there, Jalen. Just recognizing that and honoring that. Okay, let's move over to administration. Page 9.
So Sue and I had a conversation after the last meeting. We had some language in here previously that we would reimburse grantees on a quarterly basis, but that the first quarter would be paid up front for startup costs. And Sue had suggested we just try to look at, rather than a reimbursement basis, try to provide those payments up front rather than a reimbursement.
Yep.
So we are exploring that, trying to see what options we have. So because we're on such a time crunch, we have actually just pulled the language out of the rules. It did not get filed with the rules. And we will address it through our, whatever, we're trying, so just know we're trying, but we'll address it through our program guidance and grant agreements wherever we're able to land. So we're doing some offline work to try to figure that out. So
You have a real knack for getting into like the most contentious parts of.
Well, having run a program, shoestring, getting money
I
up
know.
front is critical.
It's like, you know, I don't know if the state's in the business of nonprofits floating them for the work that they're
That will be the
supposed to be
question.
doing. So,
I'm
yeah.
guessing some will think not.
Yeah.
But we're gonna try it. And we may get a response and know enough about this to actually include more language in the final set that goes to the council. But
And our
for
director is
now-
supportive of this approach too.
Oh, yeah.
So we're
Everyone
all, we're
wants
just
to
trying
make
to,
it happen.
yeah.
But we'll see if we can get there.
The rest of the language you see here is just, some terms and conditions that just help us hold grant recipients to, be compliant with the terms of our agreements. Concerns with the language. All good on administration. Okay.
That's pretty standard.
Evaluation. I think we're just about back on time.
Yes.
So evaluation, I think this is also where, this is really talking about evaluation of the program itself. And this, if you recall, was a statutory requirement for the division. But you can certainly influence, if there are things you'd like us to see beyond the statutory requirements. And I know Kali had some concerns about, by the time we get these grants out, we won't have full information for our first report. We'll barely have money out the door. So, our reports to the legislature, they understand that sometimes when our first reports come due, they're a little on the light side. But if there's anything you'd like us to include in that, we can certainly do that.
The first thing I want to suggest is there needs to be a separate line item for the planning grant evaluation because it won't be the same.
Yeah, that's, for me, it's the same in regards to 1D is building capacity for culturally specific organizations. And if we're saying that we're opening it up to, unless it's something that's intended, right? And so then no other organization other than culturally specific is able to apply for this grant because they will not be able to meet these evaluation criteria.
Okay.
So, I'm fine leaving it there.
Okay.
But again, yeah.
Well, and this is on a system level, right? So this
Right.
isn't what each individual program or applicant will be evaluated on. And I actually really appreciate that D is there because it then holds the division accountable to that outcome, and so that should inform the funding choices because you have to fund programs that get you to that.
Right. And this is a way for us to highlight too, if we do, if for some reason, we have the rules in place and there are some of those non-culturally specific organizations that slip through and don't, make it past our tight rules that we've just written. It's a way for us to show the legislature, and then you all can come in and say, hey, this didn't meet our intention. What happens? And we would, of course, work with you to refine the rules, but then it also gives you an opportunity to tell the legislature, I think you might need to tighten the statute so we get what we need.
Well, and I'm guessing D is going to be the one of those outcomes that we actually will have something to show the legislature. The others are obviously much longer term.
I have, this is Maritza, just to get more clarification. I know you, in previous meetings, we were sent the early learning, like the definitions of and factors of how positive child indicators and basically A and B are evaluated, I would say. It's a very long document and I do want to review it, but as a nonprofit organization, and I can include as ourselves in this experience, that we do not have the structure in place to evaluate A and B. Would there be like technical assistance or more definition of how nonprofit organizations that don't have that capacity built, and perhaps it would mean that they would have to apply for the capacity grant versus the program because they don't have all those pieces in place. What kind of support would be provided, or would there be additional information of how a nonprofit organization that doesn't have that structures can track those numbers or can evaluate their program's outcome?
Sure. So Maritza, this is Katie. So I think, so these measures, we were talking about them with the same language, and we've tried to change that a little bit. These are really for the entire equity fund program, although there definitely is a linkage to the individual programs that your specific organization would run. But what you want to look at is on page 5 of the document. You actually get to determine your own specific program outcomes.
Oh, okay.
So the evaluation that we're now looking at on page 9 is what the early learning division has to figure out for the entire equity fund program. It's not really getting down to that individual grant level indicators. I know it's sort
I
of,
think we need to make the language
I know,
clearer about that.
what are some suggestions?
But let me just hang on to what Katie was just referencing. If you look at page 5 at the top, number 4, those are the outcomes that individual programs are going to be asked to include in their applications. So they really are up to you to define. Does that answer your question, Maritza, about that?
It does answer that, but in regards to evaluating, like for the second, to renew our grant or to apply the second time, if we don't have those structured in place in the beginning, how can we show that we've our impact? Because I don't have that much experience writing grants or doing reports, but I've been experienced that recently, and I in the reports that I've done is that we can show very clearly that we meet the and very easily with the that we are meeting in page, let's say for example page 5 in regards to the different factors, the system disparities, but then we have trouble coming up with the data that shows the impact because we don't have the technical capacity to collect data. And so it's very hard for us as a nonprofit organization because we never had that funding to build that capacity to show data. And that's one of my concerns, and we're of course looking in ways to improve that. But how is there going to be any support provided for organizations who at the beginning to help them collect data? Is there going to be a universal form that will be provided, or some sort of guide to collect data and really look at how much impact their program has done over the last year?
Can I speak to some of that?
Good question.
That was a really, really good question. Marita, this is Sadie. Earlier in the planning process, before it moved into the rules making process, I know some of our conversations with collaborative members and the division, we talked about there being a set aside of the funding that would stay at the division for technical assistance and evaluation. So I'm wondering if that's still the plan, and things have continued to move along and evolve. So curious if that resource is still part of the plan. And then also, I think that the issue that Marita is bringing up is going to be really common among the organizations and programs that we intend to fund with this. Some of our organizations have been doing this for a really long time and have developed the evaluation design and others are newer. And so I think that is a really valid question, and it might be important, maybe when the RFP comes out or in the outreach to talk about if these are things that you still are working on, a planning grant might be best for you, or if these are things you're working on, you can count on the ELD to help you with them. Apply for a program grant and we have your back. So kind of because that will be a common question, in a common situation. So I don't know if
Really?
Sorry, in addition to your comment, is there a possibility, and I missed the webinar yesterday, I was there only for a part of it, is there an opportunity to do blending funding of doing part capacity and then part program? Or would you be able to apply for program and also do part capacity building? So that's addition to what you were saying, is that if you apply for a program because you have you've been doing the work but you haven't been doing it to the full extent to be successful and to obtain the evaluation and data that it's needed, and it's very important because we don't have the resources, we could apply for a program, but could we get technical assistance because we need that extra support? And thank you for saying it like that.
I really appreciate this conversation because that's basically what I've been dealing with, is that I'm having to learn how to collect data and do measurements myself. And luckily I'm funded to be able to play around with that, which is super, super helpful. And so I guess I was just assuming that's what that technical assistance would be there for, is to help folks who don't really have that process down, but also not constricting that process. I think that's a really big piece with my own personal experience with how we're developing our evaluation system, is really coming from our lens and how that plays out in our community versus our funders saying this is how you're going to do it. And so we've been able to, get supported in how are you collecting your data and what is that looking like and how does that show indicators of success in your community versus it's usually the opposite. But thankfully I don't have to deal with that, and then I get to play around with it because it's new to our community of how we're doing this. So I also, like, when we're talking about a template, maybe that's an option but not a requirement, because then you're constricting on how they're, because every community is different in how you're going to collect, and what success looks like for them is different. And so just not, trying to constrict, but providing different options, and especially I think allowing folks to be able to build capacity and collect the data that works best for them, and then being able to present that in a way that really works for them and their community.
So I wonder if in number 5, page 5, number 5 under application process, if we want to actually call out including data collection when we talk about technical aspects of the grant application, and call that out. I'm not sure exactly, Nikisha, what staff is thinking when they say technical aspects of the application.
Technical aspects are really sort of.
I say yay to that. I was about to ask that myself.
Okay.
I wouldn't say data collection necessarily.
Let's see what Nikisha.
So it's really about sort of function and the form, not the we won't be able to help providers answer questions, but we will be able to clarify questions, what they mean, provide some examples. We'll have the FAQs that are going, so we'll be able to provide some information, some ideas, some thoughts as we go like that. And there will be technical assistance. The thing to keep in mind with this application, with regards to the outcomes that programs are going to sort of declare, is that out the gate for some of these, we're not looking for 100% perfect. So the technical assistance that we provide through that process will help get the application in. Once we actually have sort of the awardees, there's going to be a lot of additional technical assistance provided individually to help sort of refine some of the pieces that came in through that process. So I think, and we'll have to have this sort of articulated in the FAQs as well, like, don't let perfection be sort of the enemy of good. Do your best, answer these questions to the best of your ability, and know that we're looking for ways to reach out and help through that process. We're not looking to interrupt the process or to get applicants. We want applicants to understand. So our FAQs are going to have to be really tight. Our communication is going to have to be really on point in that process. So there's that sort of process technical assistance. And then once we land on sort of our awardees, there's going to be a lot more that happens around even like budget, even a lot of different components of the application that gets submitted. So I don't know if that answers.
And I think too, when we define the program outcomes for grant recipients in number 4 on page 5, I think we were trying to remain flexible and not have it be quite as data-driven as the other programs were, to allow the grant recipients to define their own program outcomes. And I think we intentionally left the language soft in terms of advancing equity. And, you know, although we did link it to the early learning guidelines, it's to positively impact those child indicators and family indicators. So I think it's fluid enough to allow providers to go in and look at those early learning guidelines and look at what a positive child and family indicator is. I don't think it's intended to be super data and metric driven, but more qualitative driven and data driven, you know, versus data driven is what I understood. But I just want to make sure
I
that.
think you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And I think what I'm also hearing is that there is a possible need for many of our organizations and providers to receive some additional technical assistance on those pieces as well.
It sounds like more of a coaching versus
coaching.
Yeah.
Yes. So
some examples of what might be acceptable.
Right.
Yeah. But not a hard and fast. Right. This is a minute, like this is what it has to look like.
It's also really important to recognize that qualitative data is still data.
Yes.
And we tend to create a higher value on quantitative, and in fact, the qualitative can be just as or more informative.
Yes, right.
Sadie, were you gonna make a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really appreciate the time in this conversation, because I think it's really critical to make sure that the organizations doing the work get the support they need. And I feel like from what we've shared today, I don't feel like it requires any change in the way the rules are drafted, but I think it's great that Nikisha, that you're here and putting that into your thinking around the communication that goes out, and the structure of the RFP and questions, so that folks, like you said, can be successful in articulating what they know to be true, and knowing that there's some support on the other side. Helpful. I also wanted to share that yesterday, I hosted another check-in call with our broader collaborative, and we had a smaller group. We had 6 folks call in and hear an update, and there wasn't a lot of feedback. I think folks were feeling encouraged at sort of the progress being made and the way things are headed. The one piece of feedback that I heard articulated was around evaluation, and a reminder of sort of our coalition's broader vision that long-term, one of the outcomes we believe we will see is that by engaging organizations and leaders from communities impacted by these disparities, we will help move the system. And so looking at how the early learning system becomes more culturally responsive as a whole, and that's a longer term, that's not something we're going to see in the first report at all. So I don't know, how or if that shows up in the rules language around evaluation, but just wanted to bring that back, that was sort of our long-term theory of change, is that this is a strategy for broader systems transformation. So I was reminded of that on the call and promised to bring it to the group.
Thank you.
Could I put some in here now?
Yes.
Okay, so on evaluation, I was wanting to ask about that too. One of the things we face is we have gotten to the phase with a lot of technical assistance to collect data now. But what we don't have is the money to pay for the professional company enough, like Echo Northwest, to go, collate the data and put out the results. And of course, in 5 years, I want to see, or 6 years, I want to see these kids caught up doing well in school. And of course, someday, obviously, I want all of them to graduate. The 100% graduation is a big deal, you know? And so we wanted to do a really long, you know, longevity, a study, longitudinal, is that what you call it? So what I want is, I would really love it if the early learning division could plan on providing something that would be set aside for evaluation someday to show show everybody else that when we do culturally specific programs and grants just to these organizations, that we do get good results in, you know, graduation or reading scores or whatever in the state. And I would need money for my side. We all would need extra money, or we would need you guys to do it or something, you know?
Yeah, good point, Anna Olivia. And that was actually, I think, one of Sadie's comments. And Nikisha, I don't know, what's the answer if the division has a set aside to help with that?
Yes, we are going to contract with an independent evaluator. We'll be working closely with the division as well as our grantees in sort of developing the evaluation.
Nice, nice. Thank you.
Yeah. It sounds like that may be PSU.
Is going to, well, yes.
Which obviously
You don't
has
have
a lot of
contract in place right
experience
now, but-
in this area and working with many of you. So that'll be very helpful. So thanks, Anna Olivia. Good point. And looks like we can check that off. Under evaluation, if we trying to distinguish between evaluation of the individual programs and the overall program, if we just took out the word grant in number 1, so it'd be evaluation of the Early Childhood Equity Fund program each biennium. I don't know if that would help clarify that it's not per grant, but it's a program. It's obviously a minor change.
And then maybe we just say of the fund on instead of permanent outcomes. of the
Exactly.
fund. Okay.
Any thoughts about that or disagreement with it? Sadie, you look hesitant.
No, I think it's fine. Every other time we've used program in the rules, we're speaking of the grantees.
Right.
So as long as it's not confusing from a legal perspective, I'm fine.
Maybe we just take out program
Yeah,
also.
can
Maybe
we
just
just leave
say
it as the fund?
evaluation
Yeah.
of the fund each biennium.
Okay.
And the impact of the fund on. There we go.
Okay.
Great. And then that'll make the title evaluation of the fund.
Yeah,
Yes.
good point. Just emphasize that. Okay, thanks. Yeah, collective thought helps a lot. Okay, any other thoughts about the evaluation section? We haven't incorporated your input from the collaborative as far as the long-term goal, changing the system. Obviously that won't be in the next couple of years, but I don't know if we want to find a way to put it in as a long-term or placeholder.
Well, I mean, it would really be a lift for the evaluator and the ELD staff, and so I'm wondering if it's within the scope of what funding would support doing, and I guess I would kind of defer to you, Nikisha.
And I think it's part of the conversation, sort of negotiation with PSU on this piece.
Yeah.
And as we clarify things.
Certainly being able to track the system changes that are happening in order to be able to sort of reflect that. So not put it in rule, but know that Nikisha, that it'll be worked with. Does that sound okay? Or with PSU on that?
Sound okay to
Yeah.
on the collaborative, so. You look like you're thinking,
I'm not sure what we would say in the rules. So we need to.
Can we state an intention if it's, I mean, in the rules, I don't know.
I have a comment. I'm not sure what to state on the rules, but in my experience with other grant reports in regards that they focus on advocacy engagement and moving towards progressing towards system changes. We share, of course, we don't have the resources to see how the system changed because that takes time, but we do share qualitative data. As mentioned, it is very important that we share our experience when we are helping, when we are navigating that system. For example, we had as an organization, we had the experience to take parents at the Early Childhood Advocate Lobby Day, and for them to have that experience and advocate for their children, and just stating those experience it's doing the work of getting closer to a system change and doing advocacy work. So I think it would be important to put it part of the evaluation so organizations have the opportunity to share those impact or those outcomes in a way that they wish to share it.
I'm wondering if that adds additional work for organizations as well, because not all organizations may want to build capacity through advocacy, and that's another thing that we hear from other organizations, and including IRCO, and where there's this huge push for advocacy and policy, and some organizations can only have capacity to do direct services at this time, and I just don't want to include it in an evaluation that will make it a burden or a barrier for organizations to apply for the grant, knowing that advocacy is important and that it's needed for long-term system change.
I would add that it's actually additional resource to sort of the programmatic work. It's different programmatic work and it requires other resources. There might also be some challenge when the term advocacy is used. There's a lot of different, there's a spectrum of definitions. So, and for state dollars to invest in advocacy, it's a sticky area. That being said, I think there is some room for how organizations engage and so the mechanism they build for community voice to be present. And that is maybe a different thing because it informs program, it informs practice. And then I think in a very real sense, it also, elevates that community voice into a system where it isn't.
And I kind of also think of it more as accountability and work for the state and the division around how the state, and particularly the early learning division, engages with the grantees. Is it like, here you go, and here's an evaluation tool you might want to use? Or is it, we're reaching out and we're engaging, we're learning, we're changing our practice as a state, as a division, based on what we're learning from the expertise of our grantees? So to me, I think a systems outcome that the system is accountable for and responsible for doing the work around becoming more culturally responsive. I share the hesitation around that work getting moved to organizations, which often happens, right? The labor often lands in the community. So I guess I'm holding both of those things.
So do you want to try adding an E to the evaluation that would be something like on the community engagement idea, tracking community engagement or engagement with culturally specific organizations, to try to build that accountability in and make sure the evaluator is trying to track some of those system changes. You want to come up with language right now in the next 9 minutes and know that we still have a couple of other things we need to talk about. So we've got a time crunch here.
Well, I guess our question, probably mine, I'm trying to speak for others here, is that what is, understanding that we're going to elaborate more on the technical assistance for the program grant, what is the continuing relationship with funder and fundee that are also receiving the other grant?
The planning.
Not the planning grant, but just the program grant. Because that will determine the long-term relationship and the sustainability of our programs moving forward as well. And so I guess that's kind of where I don't want to build in a criteria when there is no relationship, or when there is no technical support, technical assistance, there's no engagement. And so, because we've stated with the planning grant, we didn't necessarily state anything with the program grant.
Okay, and I can tell you that the intention is both. We work closely with IGA to be in regular communication. Yeah, so there's definitely for both groups that are funded to engage with them ongoing while they're in the CDG.
So right
Also, this
now,
is a new program, so we're also learning as we go, and we haven't yet developed the agreement template. I mean, that's our task for next week after we get the rules behind us this week. So it's still being developed. I would say less is better as we move forward, so we don't lock ourselves in the loop too tightly if we have a choice. So unless it's very important to you to include something in this.
Well, I don't want to include it in evaluation because again, it adds burden into the organization, especially younger, smaller organizations. And so, yeah. So I just, again, it's more of a relationship, and not necessarily a role that we want to instill to add on to our organizations.
how about if we ask staff, because the technical assistance is mentioned in the application process. I don't think it's mentioned elsewhere unless I missed it. So how about if we ask staff between now and the end of, mid-January, when we may meet again, to consider saying something about TA under the administration part of these rules, to try to get a better understanding of what sort of TA is going to be provided. Does that sound okay? And we'll just know, we'll see what they come back with.
And maybe if it's helpful, we could, I mean, this is just an idea, maybe we schedule and have a rack, even if we don't need a lot of work on the rules, maybe we'll have more information about just the program in general by that time,
well,
including
that's at the bottom of the agenda in front of us, is that we should probably schedule one final meeting of the rack the week of January 20th, because that'll be after the public hearing process, so we'll have that input.
And can I also add, in addition to, because as we're adding more language to this with technical assistance, is that if you can add some language as far as this is a learning process for the state and that data or learnings that are the state, you're better at wordsmithing than me, but in somewhere along the lines that this is, the state will use the learning from the culturally specific organization to inform culturally specific resources or funding in the future, something along those lines.
in the rules.
In the rules, just that way it goes back to that it is one directional, that the state is learning also from culturally specific communities and tribes, and that the technical assistance kind of is going the other way as well, because you're also learning from us.
Okay. Do you mind if I email you directly to work on that language?
Could you email it to the group? But yeah, for sure.
Sure.
Or maybe just
don't
one
want to have a
person.
public meeting by email.
Oh, okay,
if
sure.
you don't mind,
Let's do
but
that.
then we can review it later in our public meeting. Yeah.
I'm gonna say goodbye.
Great.
Have to go to a meeting.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Olivia.
That was fun. I have to thank Katie and Sue because it's been amazing. I mean, I'm finding this process just amazing and very responsive to our community. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for your participation on Olivia. Okay, so we're done with the rules.
I think I just want to make sure we're all comfortable with the draft with a couple of last minute additions we've talked about here.
Any other input on the rules before we go to the wrap up? Stakeholder outreach.
Well, and so you mentioned just the quick,
Yeah.
so they're still in draft format right now. The next step in the process is the public hearing on January 15th that Remy will be holding. Public comment period closes on the 22nd, so I think, Sue, your intention was to have the meeting shortly after the public comment period, and that if there is significant public comment, we would like to bring the RAC back together, especially if it's substantive comment. And maybe we go ahead and schedule that meeting anyway, just knowing the.
Right, I'd like to just get the meeting on our calendars,
Okay.
and then if we all decide we want to cancel it, we cancel it.
And so Remy will send out a quick doodle poll, and then the ELC makes a final decision on the 30th. Right. Just really quickly, Sarah Michelson's team put together a stakeholder outreach plan. They're putting together some materials that may be useful if she'd like to see if you all would be willing to help engage your contacts with some materials that they're working on that should be ready by the end of the year. Hoping to just get the rules out as broadly as possible. We've got lists, and Remy, you know more about this process than I do, so feel free to jump in on the stakeholder process.
Well, we were hoping that, so we're going to be developing a survey over the next couple of weeks that we're hoping to have done by the end of the year, along with more information on how to hold a public meeting with your communities, and we're going to try to get different stakeholders across the state to have little mini public meetings to give us feedback to these rules. So more information on that coming soon, but we're trying really hard to develop an external stakeholder process that goes across geographies, because we're kind of limited in this Multnomah County bubble with a couple of outsiders coming in, but we really want to get the perspective of more rural communities. So once again, more information on that coming soon. I'll send out some information to y'all. We'll be asking for help holding those public meetings across the state. If anyone is interested or knows other community members who would be interested in doing something like that, who wants to be engaged in this process.
I would guess trying to tag on to or be an agenda item on some, kind of currently established or scheduled meetings would be wise, rather than asking anybody to try to set up a whole nother set of meetings.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all I'm guessing many people have more meetings than they need. So maybe that can be a piece of this, is to say, let's see what stakeholders are already convening, and we could ask for their involvement in this.
You're way ahead of us with your stakeholder engagement.
Yeah. Yes.
And I know, I'm sure OCF is going to be able to send it out to their contacts, and Meyer will do the same.
Great. Okay. Thank you. We'll be anxious to see what the materials are that you're referring to, Remy.
Thank you all.
When they're drafted.
Yeah.
It's been an amazing week, and I hope you all feel good about the work product that you produced. It was a big body of work, and I think it meets the outcome you were trying to achieve.
Thank you, everybody, and for the year plus of work that led up to successful passage of the bill, and then now implementation. Very cool. Okay. See you all in January. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.